Buddy, today was a great action. Yeah. It was a fantastic time. There's some debate exactly how many people came out, but it was very clear that the city was organized, and we're not going to stand for this any longer. I'm going to introduce James now. James is a member with Extinction Rebellion. When you think of today's environmental movements, Extinction Rebellion is definitely one of the first ones that comes to mind. They started in the UK a little over a year ago, and it's amazing how quickly this movement has spread around the world, shut down cities, shut down major institutions, and really has brought people to the fore in the class struggle and in the people struggle against climate change and all these related environmental disasters. I met James at some of the traffic blockades. He's usually the person on the microphone, speaking to the stalled cars, spreading the message of resistance and of solidarity. And beyond that, James has no other introductions. He is just a concerned person who wants to do as much as he can. So James, if you'd like to come up and talk with us.
Okay, James, you have up to 15 minutes.
It won't take that long. Thanks. Hi there, it's nice to meet all of you, and thanks for listening to me here. As Danny said, we got to know each other through our involvement in Extinction Rebellion, and you will be watching a movie this evening on basically the reason Extinction Rebellion exists. But just to make a few points about the state of the science as it currently stands. We are, as we know, in an environmental crisis. We are at the beginning of the 6th mass extinction. And our prospects of keeping our Paris Accord commitments, that is limiting the global average temperature rise to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, is not looking like it's going to materialize given current trends. Extinction Rebellion exists in response to that, and I think the climate crisis is difficult for a lot of people to deal with on an emotional level. I think it's something that's overwhelming for a lot of people. And I think people are looking to do more than simply petition their MPs or write letters or, address the editors of their newspaper. They want to do something direct, and they want to do it now. They want to have an impact while we still have the time to do that. And that's what Extinction Rebellion exists to facilitate. And if you are so disposed, I would encourage you absolutely to reach out to your local organization and get involved. Our actions primarily involve creating a disruption in public space, and our objective with that is to open a space in which we can engage with this crisis more directly than we can otherwise. I don't think that we're going to have the level of change that's required to confront this unless we bring politics back into the public sphere and actively participate in it. I think this is one of the dawning realizations that this crisis has engendered. We can't be complacent anymore. We can't afford to sit back and expect someone else to create the solutions for us. Right. We need to be actively engaged, and we need to be out there in public, putting our bodies on the line to demonstrate our level of commitment to changing things. That's what Extinction Rebellion attempted to accomplish through our series of summer traffic blockades, and that's what we'll be continuing to pursue through our upcoming series of actions. The next one falls on October 7th, and that's part of a coordinated global series of events that will be taking place on that day. Here in Canada, the theme is #BridgeOut, and we'll be occupying bridges across the country. Here in Ontario, it's going to be the Danforth Viaduct. In Vancouver, they're going to attempt to take over Burrard Bridge. And of course, there'll be many other actions taking place across the country. And in London, United Kingdom, where this whole movement began, they'll be reoccupying the 5 bridges over the Thames in kind of a return to the movement's roots. Yeah, it's an exciting time to see people returning to this form of political involvement. We know that our electoral system is somewhat dysfunctional. I think we all recognize that we are reaching the limits of what our democratic institutions can currently respond to in a meaningful way. As a society, I think we are entering a new era, and that has been ushered in through the excessive burning of fossil fuels. I think one of the most exciting parts of this new movement is the moral component, perhaps most succinctly exemplified by the actions and words of Greta Thunberg. It's not just a political or economic transition that is upon us. I think at this stage, there's a real moral reckoning happening around the world in terms of what makes a meaningful life, how we want to structure our communities, and how we want to be involved in terms of determining their direction. I think people aren't being served as effectively as they could be by our current arrangements, and we're realizing that if we want to change them, we need to act, and that is a primary component of Extinction Rebellion: direct action, and also an almost fanatical adherence to truth and honesty, which ties into the whole moral reckoning that I think that this movement really embodies. We need to start talking about our social failings and our political failings in an honest way. We need to start talking about our national histories in an honest way, and the costs that capitalism has inflicted. They've been immense. We live in a genocidal nation. I think we're all kind of coming around to realizing the foundations on which we've established our societies and the urgent need to address this if we're going to be able to move forward in a just manner. Yeah, there's we can't keep business as usual if we hope to have the changes that we need in order to survive. I will stop talking now because I think what will be obvious. I'd like you to get involved in the Extinction Rebellion, but to that point, what I can say, I think, will pale in comparison to the factual reality that you're about to be confronted with in the upcoming film. It is bleak. In terms of where we stand, we are headed towards some pretty drastic changes in terms of our climate. I think a lot of the projections that were presented in 2018 in the IPCC report, we're realizing now that we're actually exceeding that substantially. But even though that can be super depressing, I think that there is a certain silver lining, so to speak, in the fact that in the face of this, And in the face of the temptation to despair, people are still acting. And it's not because they think that they're going to have some kind of return from their action, or because there's some kind of specific future objective that they're aiming towards, because the future is highly uncertain right now. We don't know the direction that things are going to go, but people are acting anyway because it's the right thing to do. And I think this is what distinguishes the current movement from so many that have preceded it. It's immediate, it's about returning our attention to the present, and it's about being the change that you want to see. It's about living that good life because it's good, not because you've got some plan down the road that it factors into, or because we think we're going to get some personal return. It's about doing what's right, not just for the climate, but for our communities. It's about looking after our earth, looking after each other, realizing that we need to take care of each other as people. We have had such a callous neoliberal agenda thrust upon us and rationalized over the past many years, and we're finally beginning to turn away from that. This is an exciting time, and I look forward to seeing, hopefully, some of you out there in the streets, maybe on October 7th at the Bloor Viaduct.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. Daniel, I think give you 3 or 4 minutes, because there was another guest speaker. Maybe you can give her regrets and if there's anything you need to add. Thank you, comrade.
Thank you. You had to run.
I can really quickly speak. So
Just because we're behind time.
Yes,
3 minutes.
Very quickly, I just want to send the regrets on another XR comrade who has been active today in the action since really early in the morning, suffered a bit of heat stroke in the sun while painting murals. They echo a lot of the points that James brought up. Obviously, Irene brought up a lot of the same points. They're specifically involved in the outreach components, and they just really want to echo the calls for solidarity in confronting what is really a disastrous system that we're in right now. It's, as James mentioned, it's a system that we didn't choose openly. It was thrust upon us by a small handful of people that are deriving immense benefit from that system at the cost of everybody else and their livelihood and their futures. So XR is doing what they can, and we're also, as socialists, supporting them and going to these actions, because our communities are ultimately what are paying the price, and that's what we really put first. So we can get to the movie now, right?
Yeah.
Here you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel.
Okay, so just sit back and relax. Somebody will get the lights and we will turn on the film. As a lot of you know, that each fall, Socialist Action hosts a social education conference. This year will feature talks on imperialism, the next Great Recession, climate crisis, and working class politics. This conference is coming up in November 15 and 16 at Woodsward Residence U of T, which is sort of across the street and a little west of here. And there will be 4 sessions, 1 on Friday night and 3 on Saturday. Tickets will be on sale shortly over the next few weeks, and they will be $15, or it'll be $20 at the door, or $5 per session. But if you plan on attending the whole thing, it's better to get your tickets when you see them, because you will get them for $15. So that's November the 15th and 16th. I know it's a ways off, but we start advertising early. And it's the Socialist Education Conference. Okay, the next announcement, I'm going to call on our young comrade, Aromel, to talk about Stop the Cuts Education in Peel's rally.
Hello, everybody. I would just like to inform everyone that on Saturday, October 5th, at 1 p.m., there will be a protest rally to stop the education cuts in Peel, which will be held at the office of Khalid Rashid, Progressive Conservative MPP for Mississauga East Cooksville, at 1420 Burnham Throp Road, Unit 315, 1 block east of Dixie. This action is initiated by Socialist Action in Mississauga and is endorsed by the Peel District of Elementary Teachers' Federation of Ontario, the Peel Region Labour Council, the Canadian Union of Public Employees Local 2544, Peel District Coop Council Local 9130, OPSEU Local 244, Sheridan College faculty, NDP Socialist Caucus, and the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty. So I hope everyone comes there. So.
Thank you, comrade. Of course, you did leave out the most important union, but I'll forgive you this time. Canadian Union of Postal Workers has also endorsed it.
An acorn now.
An acorn now. Okay. All right. So, comrades, the format will be maybe a little bit different tonight because our guest speaker, because such of a hard day and a long day that he had, couldn't stay. And usually the format, as most of you know, is that the guest speaker stays and answers any questions that might come up about the subject matter. But in this case, he couldn't stay, so I'm going to ask Comrade Barry Weisletter to open the discussion, and we will see if there's any questions comes up, we can do our best to answer them. And as you know, it's 3 minutes. Each comrade, sister, brother has up to 3 minutes to make an intervention. And if there's questions, we usually take 2 or 3. But we'll see as we go along because the format is a little different tonight because our guest speaker had to leave. Okay, so Barry, you can open the discussion.
Well, good evening, everyone. How are you doing?
All right, yeah.
I'm a little reluctant to ask you how much you enjoyed the film because that operates on 2 levels. It was a very professional and beautifully produced film, but the subject matter is, well, rather striking, rather depressing. But the truth is, today was an historic day. All around the world, millions of people demonstrated against climate injustice. So we will look back on this day 2, 5, 10 years from now, and you'll all remember where you were when the world marched against climate injustice. So I begin by saying, welcome to the Anthropocene. Who can tell me what the Anthropocene, what this term means? Yes?
Yeah, I think it's a new age, like, you have a Jurassic or, Triassic now. Anthropocene is that the scientists realize that the human impact is now realizable. Like if they come in the future, they realize that there was really a change in the geologic, impacts. So this is why it's called now Anthropo means the human.
Yeah.
Now we are in the age of Anthropocene. Yeah.
Anthropos is a Greek word. It means human, and this Anthropocene means it's an epoch or era that is defined by the negative human impact on nature. So as our guest speaker said before the film, James from Extinction Rebellion, we should bring the climate movement into the political arena. Well, friends, it is. It is the number 1 or 2 issue in the Canadian federal election and in elections around the world. So, mission accomplished, at least partially. But the major political parties failed to adequately advance policies to cope with the magnitude of the situation. Let's begin with the Conservatives. They ignore the issue. They try to change the channel. And as far as the People's Party of Canada, led by the racist Maxime Bernier, they deny the issue. So that's even worse. The Liberals, as someone said, pretty words from Justin Trudeau, but despite the expression of concern and that Justin walked apparently in the demonstration in Montreal today.
Eggs thrown at him.
He managed to dodge some eggs, I understand. The Liberals bought a pipeline. They bought a leaky pipeline at twice its market value, and they intend to double track that pipeline, which will create a couple thousand jobs for a couple of years, and then maybe 300 long-term jobs, and which will pollute the environment so that Canada will be incapable of accomplishing even the very modest goals of the Paris Climate Accord.
Shame.
The Green Party aspires to a green capitalism. In other words, to make a transition in terms of their understanding that will be profitable, that corporations will want to do. But if corporations wanted to do this, I might think that they would have already begun doing so. Even the NDP, which we in Socialist Action critically support, we're urging everyone to vote for NDP candidates across the country, notwithstanding some of the shenanigans that occurred prior to the writ being dropped in terms of nomination contests in constituencies around the country. Even the NDP, as a Labour Party, speaks only of ending subsidies to big oil, and they talk about promoting electric vehicles, giving a tax incentive to consumers to buy vehicles like this, which would, they think, prompt the mass production of electric vehicles and ensure that there are recharging stations across the country. This is grossly inadequate. And in terms of the timeline we face on the existential threat to human survival, it is really grossly, grossly inadequate. Our view as socialists is that we need a workers' government and a socialist revolution because that's what it will take for a planned economy based on green energy and democratic control. Our view is that we need to change producer behavior more than we need to change consumer behavior. Producer behavior will lead the way, and they must be compelled, not just to end plastic bags at supermarkets, although that's a good step, but to change the big energy picture. So how can that be accomplished? Well, we believe that we need to remove the obstacles to anti-capitalist action, because it's not in the capitalist interest, it's not in the private sector interest, it's not in the interest of the billionaires to make this rapid transition to a carbon-free energy system. So we need to remove the obstacles to anti-capitalist action because that's what it will take, anti-capitalist action. Obviously, this entails removing from power the Liberals and the Tories and other parties backed by Bay Street. But it also entails removal of the labor and social democratic bureaucracies. They must be displaced from leadership of the workers' movement because they stand in the way of the action necessary to advance an anti-capitalist agenda, both electorally and in every other sense of the word. The labor and social democratic leadership of the workers' movement is definitely a big obstacle, and it will not change without push. So how can that be addressed? Well, we in Socialist Action focus on this latter task. We don't think we can effect a socialist revolution overnight. We don't think it's even presently on the immediate agenda, although it's objectively necessary. We want to address the obstacles on the scale that we have the capacity to intervene. And so we do this in the unions, and we do this in the, that was impressive. We seek to do this in the unions, and we seek to do this in the labor movement. So how exactly do we do that? Well, in the New Democratic Party, we founded some 25 years ago the Socialist Caucus, and the Socialist Caucus has many programmatic achievements to its credit, which I can list if anyone wants to know. And we seek to continue to fight for that. And there are a number of socialist candidates, notwithstanding Jagmeet Singh's political filter, who are running in races all across the country. I'm thinking of Dirk Prout in London North Centre. I'm thinking of Jessa McLean in York Simcoe. I'm thinking of Stephen Crozier in Vancouver, and yeah, almost done. In the unions, we build the Workers' Action Movement. And the Workers' Action Movement is a left-wing caucus in a number of unions that opposes concessions bargaining, austerity, two-tier and precarious employment, and that fights for democracy in the unions and the NDP. And we seek to build an independent revolutionary workers' party. Socialist Action is also active against imperialism and militarism. So we've been engaged in exposing Chrystia Freeland, who represents this electoral district. And we've confronted her on Canada Day and also more recently at the U of T Law faculty, and interrupted one of her meetings where she was addressing softball questions to pose some hard political questions on the portfolio of foreign affairs, which she sought not to address up to that point. We're active against anti-immigrant bigotry, Islamophobia, and Zionism. We're against the oppression of indigenous peoples. We're against the spending cuts by capitalist governments aimed at reducing the social wage and weakening unions and all workers' organizations. And so the example of the fight against cuts in Peel, where we're building a branch of our party, is an example. We advocate direct mass action and the use of the general strike as a tactic to confront and defeat the boss's agenda. And if you agree with that perspective, and if you want to make a difference now, while we still have time to do so, you should join us. Thanks very much.
Okay, so I'm opening the floor up to somebody want to talk about the film and what they thought of it or what they thought was missing or whatever. Yes, go ahead.
So what's really insidious, James mentioned it a bit, and in the Extinction Rebellion, they're explicitly against this, is that neoliberal idea of shaming individuals for their consumption habits, because it presupposes that we actually have full autonomy in the way we can live our lives. We can't all afford Teslas. Some of us live 2 hours away from where we work, so we can't afford to bike into work. Some of us can't afford to shop at the health centers where everything's organic and raised locally because it's more expensive. So Extinction Rebellion presupposes first and foremost that we need to, as Barry mentioned, tackle the producer habits and compel them to do so, because again, right now it's more profitable to burn down the rainforest than to expand the rainforest. And the 3 goals of Extinction Rebellion, which James didn't mention, are very straight to the point. 1, tell the truth. So get the government and the media to actually admit that we're facing an ecological crisis, the likes of which we've never faced before. 2, to demand immediate action in cutting carbon emissions and to also halt biodiversity loss. And they usually have more ambitious goals than even the governments are willing to dip their toes into. And the 3rd one, which I'm most compelled by, is that they don't want the governments in charge of deciding how we're going to meet those goals. They want citizens' assemblies to come together and to be empowered to actually decide how we're going to transition our economies, how we're going to transition our communities. Because again, we're the ones that suffered under the system. We didn't cause it, we didn't choose this. We've been alienated from these decisions, so we should reclaim that ability. He's talked about bringing this back into the politics, but he also wants to bring, and all Extinction Rebellion members want to bring people back into the politics at the community level and make that meaningful change. So to march today with all those people was really empowering, and I see real change coming.
Thank you, Dennis. Anybody else? Yes, go ahead, sister.
I was particularly impressed during the film about the mention of methane, or methane instead of methane. And Canada has a special role when it comes to methane. We're already in the position of not meeting our obligations under the Paris Accord. We're well under that commitment, but methane is hidden in our permafrost, which covers a massive amount of our northern territory. It's also tied up in methane hydrates right along the Arctic coastline, which is sometimes our forgotten coastline in this country. And I have heard very little about anyone really doing anything serious about the control of methane in this country.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Julius?
Yeah, I thought the film was great, but I wanted to talk about actually what's going on right now in the workers' movement. And I think that while there's a climate crisis, there's certainly a crisis in the workers' movement in this country, particularly in Ontario. Since the election of Doug Ford, the labor movement, and when I say the labor movement, I mean the labor unions and by extension the labor-based NDP, have really done nothing to mobilize and organize us to fight against what's coming with the Doug Ford government. And what we've already faced and what we're going to face after the federal election, they have done almost nothing. But more than that, they have purposefully blocked radicals from leadership positions, both in our unions and in the NDP. And I bring this up because Barry talked about some of what was going on with candidates. The NDP, the Labour-based party, is purposefully blocking out activists, those of us who are actually on the front lines, who do the dirty work of trying to build movements on the ground, and instead choose candidates who are lawyers, who are people who have had nothing to do with these fights, and people, frankly, who are not going to fight in Parliament for these issues in the way that we need to. So I was incredibly inspired by what Greta had to say most recently when she spoke at the meeting of the UN and basically said to the room, fuck you. Fuck all of you. You have done nothing. You expect the children to fix this problem?
Yeah.
Fuck you. We're children. And I hear this because I've been an executive board member of my union, and I hear it from the labor leaders. We'll follow the children. The labor movement has the resources, right? They refuse to use them. And the question that we have to ask, is that because of incompetence? Or is there something more nefarious going on? And I think that it's much more nefarious. We call them the labor lieutenants of capital. They are there to protect the system because they know that change is coming. And when it comes, we will fucking boot their asses out of their space. And they're going to wear this climate disaster. The leadership of the workers' movement will wear this. And we have to tell them that. We have to start telling them that now because they need to feel afraid. If they're afraid of the boss class, they sure as hell should be afraid of the 99% because we won't let it down.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Julius. And I mean, this young comrade from Sweden has done more in the short time she's been doing it than the leaders around the world have done in 20 years. You know, so, but it's just ridiculous what's happening. Okay, is there anybody else that, yes, go ahead.
I don't know what I'm going to say might sound a little bit funny, so please don't judge. I'm still kind of new to what solutions we can come up with.
That's okay, comrade.
I'll use some humor in this situation.
Well, it's like, it's funny, but I'm also half serious, so it's like, I don't know. But I like, you know, I'm thinking about a lot about what people are saying that times are getting very desperate. Like right now, I hear that half of India, like, will not be habitable in the next 5-6 years. And already, like, you know, the far right in Europe are mobilizing and are accelerating due to the, you know, Syrian refugee crisis. There's going to be climate refugees going to be coming in, and that's going to cause them to accelerate, and it's going to be more of this mess that might end up coming to places like Canada if it's not already here. And you know, obviously that's going to involve us accelerating because they're accelerating, right? And the problem is I see more warfare and I see more violence coming from all this. And I propose, perhaps, is it possible to have environmentally friendly weapons?
Okay.
Environment.
They're protecting the environment.
But also, like, kind of doesn't pollute the environment because, to be honest, like, what other options are there? We can keep pressuring the governments as much as we can and maybe get the bare minimum down, but I'm for environmentally friendly weapons, to be honest.
The only weapon we need is a guillotine.
Yeah.
It's very efficient.
Runs on kinetic energy.
Badly, really.
A general strike is a
Okay, so we'll go out and kick some ass. Okay, Judy?
Yeah, pollution and all that is very, the rulers are very racist towards people in the third world or native people in Canada and the US. And for example, I was in the Dominican Republic a few months ago, and they told us we can't use the drinking water, we have to have bottled water. So that's the same, even in Cuba they say that that water should be bottled, not used from the taps. So it's the environmental movement has to connect with the with the anti-racist movement, the Native movement, and other movements that are fighting capitalism if we're going to survive.
Thank you, Judy. Corey?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo what everyone else. I just want to echo what everyone else has said. That it's really about system change and not about personal change. I mean, definitely culture is a factor. We know that we consume way too much, especially here in Canada. We're some of the most consumptive people in the world. And but it has to come down to system change. And it was really disappointing to see. I mean, I'm not shocked, but disappointed to not see that mentioned really in the movie. They talk about certain corporations or certain government officials that are not taking action, but no government official, essentially, except for very rare people, have stood up to the system. They continue to rely on the economy. Like, the economy is the most important thing. We need to protect the economy above all other things. Well, there's not going to be an economy if the world's falling apart, right? Like what they said about how we could do something now, it's going to cost something, but if we wait, it's going to cost even more. But I mean, I think these people that are in charge don't really care. Like they said, they're gonna die eventually or whatever. They're gonna have all their riches and all their property hoarded up in places that that can't be touched, and they're gonna have private security firms or fascists protecting them or whatever. So it's something to think about. And I don't want to go towards violence. I think that self-defense or defense of the environment is very important, and it's going to come to that in some situations. But we have to do the work on the ground to convince the majority of the people that this is important and worth fighting for, and that we don't want to get to a civil war. That you're going to tell your brother that he may say some racist shit, that you're not going to put up with that, and whatever, like situations like that. So I just think that we want to think about that. And also about the thing that they talked about, like they didn't say feedback loops, but it's about feedback loops. About the environment's going to get out of control, and we're not going to be able to do anything to stop it. So, I mean, it's important to take that step now. So, I mean, it's important to talk to everyone around you and make sure that they're taking action. And that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Do I see another? Yes, Maraj, and I'll get you after Peter. Go ahead.
So, in the movie, it was very interesting, and interesting in the sense, in the painful sense. It was interesting. And 1 or 2 minutes of scenery they have shown is about the place where I was born and brought up. And my ancestral home was a damaged house. So I'm actually a victim. My family members are a victim there. So okay, so that's a part of as a part of personal experience. But, if I tell actually what is the solution for that, what we tell about all these things like electric cars or sucking the carbon dioxide and converting it. So other technology like solar technology. So these things are not mature. We should have thought some 50 or 60 years back, but capitalism did not allow us to proceed in that. So we should have thought long back. And now we are fast, we are entering into a crisis where we don't have any returns. Another problem is that actually it is it's very painful actually. It's around how many 70,000, 70 lakhs. I'm not remembering. Years back our species was evolved, and in a couple of decades we are going to extinct from this earth. It's very painful actually. Tragic. When I look at my child, I feel pain. How long? How many more generations? It's finishing. So it's painful actually. We are one of the last generations in this earth. This is not handled. But the problem is that it was there actually. It was man's nature's contradiction. When the human beings started changing, agricultural revolution started. From industrial revolution onwards, we are bothered about pollution was clearly visible. But in agricultural revolution onwards, we are having problems. We started disturbing the nature. But can we go back? As some people say, let us go back, let us eat only vegetable, or let us only organic diet, only community level we make agriculture, or switch off the lights. No, we cannot go back. society, that's no, we cannot return, we have to go forward. So the only solution is that we are, whatever alternate technologies we are developing, that also one day will create problem. For example, solar cells, that will generate heavy metals, that will pollute the earth. So what is all these things, there's only solution actually should be a planned economy. So each time, if you have to move forward, you should under a planned economy. Whatever crisis comes, only under a planned economy we can handle, and well planned way advanced technology will be developed, and this will be replaced in new one. Because it's crisis, it's a man-nature contradiction. We cannot solve it. Only a planned economy can solve it. So that's my understanding. I will just say. Now, just one thing for
30 seconds.
sorry. One thing for all of our thought, especially my leader, Larry's thought, that the 70s onwards there were a lot of popular movements actually, and all over the world, left in general failed to divert it to the right direction, like the feminist movement, so many other movements, 70s onwards. So environment is going to be a big popular movement coming days, I hope actually. All classes going to be involved. Majority, except the very vested interest, everybody is going in. So we have to start thinking, there's a right opportunity to start thinking how to divert this popular movement to convert it into a revolution.
Thank you, comrade. Peter?
Barry mentioned that Greta Thunberg and Louis also mentioned that politicians say nice things, but they don't act. And I think you have to give real examples of this happening right now in Canada. We have an opportunity in also a plant that is closed.
Yeah.
There's a group of people that will be bringing a feasibility project on Monday. I'll convert that plant and build electric vehicles. Initially, vehicles for the post office, for hydro, even rural lands, so for transportation, vans, for public transportation in rural areas. This is an opportunity that they can take. It's nice for Germany to talk about electrifying transportation, but let's do it, right? And the other opportunity is stop selling armored vehicles to Saudi Arabia.
The war.
Let's convert these things can be done now. There's a political will to do it. And another part of the NDP platform recently on the climate bank, and this was going to give money to corporations to do some of these things. But why can't we give this money to, for example, cooperation of public nationalization of GM plant, and also building solar plants. These can be done publicly. We don't have to, under public control, with people represented on those boards from different communities, indigenous communities, environmental community, and citizen assembly. All these can be done now. We should be talking about that, and rather than saying electrifying, you're going to rely, you're going to give $5,000 credit. We should build these things, and you can have a fleet. You don't have to have ownership cars. You can have a rental fleet. People don't drive all the time. You have charging stations already done through existing infrastructure we have in the post office and other government institutions. And that's what we should be talking about. And I think that's in the meaning of what Barry said about, and Julie said, legal meaning taking action now. These are the things we should be talking about.
Okay, thank you, comrade. Yes, Carol?
You can go down a million rabbit holes, there's all kinds of things to be said, but I try to kind of look at it and what's really happening, what the pattern is.
Carol, would you mind standing so we can hear you better?
Sure. Okay.
Thank you.
You can just talk infinitely, and in the meantime, everything can collapse. So I really try to visualize things in very simple terms. And I think there's really only one way of living on this planet. There's only one way. That we are part of the planet, and if we take more than we give, then we're not going to survive. It's basic, and that is the essence of capitalism, profit. Profit is always about, I'm going to take more than I give back. That's what a profit is, right? It means exploitation, whether you're exploiting the environment or people, and it's based on a power differential too. So that you take someone who's weaker. I mean, it's not a fair exchange. Capitalism is never a fair exchange. And the idea is not just profit, but it's maximum profit.
Yeah.
And there's just no limit to it. So if you kind of look at it that way, and there's absolutely this system, it will take us to Extinction Rebellion. And Vandana Shiva said something. This system takes living systems and creates dead matter out of living systems. I mean, living system, dead matter. Simple. But I think one of the biggest problems is how do we get the power structures? How do we get rid of them? Because I think ordinary people, we lived just fine with it before the capitalists, and we can live fine without them. I mean, workers can run their own factories. We know that. We don't need the bosses. We don't need these people telling us what to do. And for years, it's been sort of my mind is how do we get that level out? How do we cut the hair off the? I think that's the biggest problem. I think it's one of the biggest. I have a lot of faith in ordinary people, by the way. I think people can manage just fine with it, the bosses. So that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. Okay, yes, go ahead, Bro.
Just a small thing, like if we go back to history, we will realize that the natural catastrophe is the main reason of civilization being destroyed. Like in Greece, when the main cause of the Greece civilization being destroyed is that they changed their forest into, for the cattle. So once the environment changed because the trees are cut, the whole cycle of in Greece in the past changed. So this is what destroyed the civilization. So it's not like the wars or it's not like the rulers. It's really because they play with the nature. They deforestation of the surroundings. This is one thing. I think also there is another empire in Cambodia. The Great Monsoon also affected that great civilization. There is also in Peru, like the people start drawing big lines on the ground that you can see only from high altitude because they were trying to worship God because there are no water. So they try to, be despair of doing whatever they can just to, they need like a, source of water. So what I say is that the history tells us that changing the environment is the major cause of, the collapse of civilization. Yeah. So, and it's really there. You just need to go back to history and see how it is.
Okay, thank you. Okay, somebody else like to speak? Okay, anybody else that hasn't spoken would like to speak? Anybody that has spoken would like to speak a second time for a couple of minutes? Corey, 2 minutes.
Okay, I forgot something I was going to say. I was going to talk about the war, but that's fine. Someone else talked about it. But about Singh and the NDP, it's very troubling because the NDP base has a lot of good support for a lot of good causes, but the NDP leadership seems to ignore them or just go along with sort of the status quo because I guess they're trying to capture more general broad votes, right? But to do with the pipeline is very disheartening because Singh said one thing in an interview saying, things have to be done differently. We can't just be like invading indigenous land and telling them what to do. But then he was in Quebec and he rolled that back saying, I didn't say that they would have a veto. So he essentially said what Justin Trudeau said. He said, we need to change things, change the way we converse with these communities. But then immediately said, we're not going to give them a veto. So if we need, essentially saying, if we need to put it through, we're going to put it through, right? We're not going to listen to these communities. And that's a huge problem, talking about taking back direct control things. Indigenous reserves should have that. They have a contract with Canada saying that they have rights over their land. But Canada voids it all the time, right? They have no rights. Same thing with when you go on strike or whatever. You try to exercise direct control, and the government says no. It's not the corporation, although they're whispering in the ear of government, I'm sure. It's the government shutting us down. So we have to show up at those indigenous reserves, or when indigenous block pipelines, or when workers are on strike. It's important to be there to support that, to give broad support, to stand up to police and corporations and government trying to shut down actual democracy, direct democracy, community democracy. It's not broad majority democracy, but it matters because it's affecting those communities locally. To those people, they have to live there. We all have to live somewhere, and we should all be saying what happens in the place where you live. I think that's very simple.
Okay, so anybody else would like a couple of minutes? Yes, go ahead, sister. And then we're going to close the list.
Just wanted to recall and remind that Canada is a very fortunate country in having one of the largest supplies of fresh water in the world. But we have managed to pollute about 1/3 of that water, and allowing the Alberta tar sands abomination to continue will guarantee the destruction and pollution of even more. The water that is used for mining, not drilling and flowing, but mining the bitumen is enormous. And then it leaves behind poisonous tailing ponds. And now they have destroyed an area the size of England in northern Alberta. And the prospects are, especially under what we're hearing from the different leaders, that even more destruction will occur.
Thank you. Okay, so the list is closed, and I'm going to move now, unless somebody that hasn't spoken would like to say something. No? Okay, so I'm going to close the list and turn it over for 6 minutes to Comrade Boisletter to wrap up this meeting.
I'm not a climate expert. I'm not a scientist. Well, political science, but not the other. And I don't really have a lot to say in terms of wrapping things up, but I'm just going to make two quick points. One, I want to thank Carol for what she said, because she talked about something that Marxism understood, analyzed, and criticized more than 150 years ago, and that's the metabolic rift. The metabolic rift is the shift of nutrients out of nature, not returned to nature. This is a net deficit for natural resources, for nature. It means that we plant a lot of stuff, we consume a lot of stuff, but we don't put it back into nature, which means that we despoil the land, the natural landscape, and make it less and less possible for us to survive. And that's because profit rules, not human interest, in harmony with nature. And the only way to make that occur, as Miraj explained and others addressed, Peter addressed this and others, and that is to plan the economy, to ensure that that which comes out also goes back in, right? That requires conscious planning, right? And not leaving it to the vagaries of the free market. I mean, maybe a free market existed 200 years ago somewhere on Earth, but we don't have such a thing today. But you know what I mean. The dynamic of the capitalist profit system is towards collapse. Now, there was a fellow who wrote a book called Collapse.
Yes.
His name is Jared Diamond. That's right. I read this 4 or 5 years ago. Any of you read that book? He looks at some settlements, like the Vikings who came across the North Atlantic and settled in Greenland and on the shores of what is today known as Newfoundland. And they couldn't settle there for longer than, 2 or 3 generations, because they were not able to operate there in harmony with nature. And so they exhausted the resources in terms of how they exploited the resources, as their technology, their cultural knowledge enabled them to do. And they floundered and they withdrew, right? Now, put that on a world scale. And that gives you a glimpse of what we face unless we take control of the environment, unless we cut across the mysticism of the market and actually substitute the ingenuity of the human genius to put back into nature and to live in harmony with nature. We can do this. This is not about going backwards. This is about going forwards, but intelligently and in harmony with nature. Okay, the last point I'm going to make is kind of an announcement. It's kind of relevant to this, but like everything is. There's something happening tomorrow morning. Have you heard about the organization called Pegida? It comes out of Northern Europe. They're homophobic,
racist,
Islamophobic,
xenophobic,
just horrible, alt-right, semi-fascist organization. They're rallying downtown in the morning, and they plan to march into the gay village tomorrow morning.
Really?
So anti-fascist groups will be meeting at 11 a.m. tomorrow at Church and King Street, St. James Park. There's a church there. To stop the racist, alt-right, anti-gay bigots. And Socialist Action plans to be there because that's one of the things we do, right? We don't think Canada's on the verge of a fascist takeover. No, we're far from it, but we intend to crush the fascists and the anti-immigrant and homophobic and Islamophobic racists before they get a march on us. So I'm wondering how many people here might be available to be there tomorrow morning. I know you're hearing about this in most cases for the first time, but with a quick show of hands, any people available?
Is it Church and King? I thought it was Church and Wellesley.
Yeah, they changed it. And I just got an email to that effect from a couple of sources. So it's at St. James Park, Church and King, just outside there's a Catholic church there. That's the rallying point. I think because the racists they're rallying just south of there. So the idea is to stop them at that point, stop the invasion of the gay village and the obscenities they want to express in it. So, okay, there's 4 or 5. Yes?
Do you think it's necessary for the community vote or by police to mask up? Because, like, I'm a part of the GUC, and I'm, like, afraid that, like, I could get doxxed.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe just me.
I think you have to be comfortable doing whatever you think you need to do in order to participate, and I'm not going to tell you that you should or should not cover. I'm just going to address the general. Have a minute to do that? Mm-hmm. The general tactic of developing a squad of people who are masked all the time at these actions, I think is problematic because the individuals who comprise that group are not necessarily in mortal danger, but they see this as a way to take the initiative to, in other words, really to take control of the anti-fascist action and reduce most of the rest of the folks as observers, as bystanders. We're not for that kind of substitutionism. I'm not saying that we want to exclude them, but I mean, their tactic, the black bloc tactic, is not one that we share, although we respect their interest in confronting the fascists, and that's fine. So I can't say what you should do. You should do whatever makes you comfortable participating in the event. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, I don't know if I'm really black bloc.
Okay. So I've taken my time. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I want to thank everybody for coming, and of course our guest speaker that was here. We thanked him when he left. And now I would, well, of course, some of our comrades will stay behind. We need to put all of our stuff away. But then usually